25, 30, maybe 40 years. And so what I'm going to do, I'm not going to talk any more theory this afternoon, but I'm going to get just as dry and talk about the exam. A couple of my students up here are going to groan because they know what's going to be coming up very soon. Their most wonderful question there. Now, what have we got here? For some reason, it's not projecting. Okay. We won't worry about if there's a few little dodgy things here. For some reason, the projection doesn't work as well. But most of you should know you're going to be doing an exam. You're going to be doing a 2-hour exam with 10 minutes. You are also the first group ever to do the ANESA online HSC exam. Yeah, I know, everyone's excited. Oh, don't let NESA people hear that, they will cry. I'm going to guarantee probably in 10 years' time, a good portion of the exams will probably be online. It's society. But who here's played with the lockdown browser? And most of you will have done it. I can tell you from doing an ANESA session at the end of last term, they've done a new version. There is a lockdown version, but they should be releasing, if they haven't already, a version that you can just go online and play with yourself. It's going to be a completely free thing. You don't have to go in and sign in and do all that. I'm not sure if I haven't checked, but they said very early term 3. Yeah, because I think they wanted people to play with it. And they didn't want, because the lockdown browser, when I went to the session, I was mucking around with it, it actually wouldn't let me do anything for 10 minutes. Even though I was in there as a practice, I'm waiting, okay, 10 minutes, because it did the 10 minutes reading time practice. And I couldn't even get out of it. I couldn't control alt delete or do my Apple little trick either. But you will be doing this here. That is all NESA garbage. That's not for you guys to worry about. That's for us to worry about it. But you can bring calculators into the exam. I think the lockdown browser does have a simple scientific calculator in it, but there's no reason why you actually can't bring your own calculators in as well. They did confirm as well, you can have writing paper during the exam, but the writing paper, you can't take it out of the exam. So the person supervising the exam, which will be one of the little old ladies and men that come in and do those for you, they will have to take it all off you. You know, the normal stuff. So if you're doing the 15-mark question, and some of you may think, I just wanted a quick planning paper. Sorry, yeah. Of course, you know it's 50 marks. You will have headphones. Probably take your own headphones so that you don't get cooties off someone. Because there will be at least one question there which will have a video stimulus. I think NESA, you know, if they're going online so that they can do some fancy stuff with you. It's not just going to be the same they've done always in the past. Yes, Sean.
Sorry, just one thing about the headphones.
Sorry, guys. Thanks.
Try to avoid Bluetooth and wireless headphones.
I think the direction is wired headphones. Just so you don't cheat. I think basically, yeah, I think the other question there as well, I know a few of you have come a very long distance, which is, you know, Cowra, and was it Bomaderry? I think you guys win. Oh, Newcastle, that's not that bad. That's just up the M1. One of the things there, NESA have indicated as well, particularly you in the country areas, you might have dodgy NBN or something like that there. Apparently NESA are sending the invigilators, for every student you have, they will have a backup USB. So even if the network goes down, they can actually do this weird self-contained USB version of the exam, and they will also have written copies of the paper just in case the power goes out as well. So most of you will be doing the online exam. If circumstances prevent it, you may actually do this. And anyone from the mountains? Anyone here from the Blue Mountains? Hopefully there's no bushfires this year. Because that, I think, was that 2 years ago or 3 years ago? Anywho, back here. Your paper has two sections. First one is 20 marks. That's your section A. And you got basically short answers up to 20 marks. Most you get is 7 marks, and there'll be at least 3 to 5 items. That's what we'll look there. Section 2 is basically the extended response marks. And pretty much you can be asked a question from any part of the syllabus in any of those sections there. I think the original thing they were saying Module 1 had been Part A, but that's changed. Pretty much you can be asked a question from anywhere. And I think the one that's probably going to screw a few of you is Part B in Section 2, which is an extended, basically an essay. I would suggest for 15 marks, they're saying here about 600 words, which you can pretty much, I think the Lockdown browser actually tells you how many words you're using. Now, what they're recommending is if you go over, you go under, don't get there, but don't write 1,200 words. Pretty much, if you write 1,200 words, you're probably just talking crap for 600 of those. There's a few of my students I have to teach to be concise and get to the point. NESA don't care about your language, they just care that you make the points. And we'll just I could have scrolled in a little bit easier. That's your front page there. Nothing too fancy, that's just what it's going to look like. Things to think about, as I said there, clear and concise. Every marking guideline, and we'll have a look at a couple, every mark guideline says clear and concise, thorough. Clear and concise means get to the point. I've marked senior science for the last 10, 12, something odd years, and I can tell you the amount of dribble I have had to read in that time, because people just write down stuff. Now, I marked senior science, but I also teach physics. Well, probably, I don't know what I'll be marking this year, but physics as well. Like, don't just write everything you know about a subject. Answer the question, get to the point, and I'll show you a couple of things there. You need to build a cogent argument out of long and extensive prose. That means you're going to do really well in extension English, but that may not help you here. Get to the point. Section 1. This is what my guys have been looking forward to. And they always look forward to concrete. Now, the good thing is, Sham's done this. I'm not going to do any stats with you today. I'm going to bypass the concrete. I'm also going to sort of bypass a little bit of the fur seals, because that's a bit more statistical stuff, and we're just going to go past that. But your teachers will have access to these presentations. They can go through this stuff with detail, but I think we're all done with stats for the day. So we're going to go to section 2. And here there's a few interesting little questions here. Inhaling isopropanol, which is isopropanol, pretty much just rubbing alcohol, isn't it? Yeah, I don't think most people would suggest, yes, probably is a cure for nausea, but inhaling too much of it will give you nausea. But this is not about stats. It shows you a few stats here, but you're asked a few little things here. Justify the ethical protocols considering planning and conducting this study. So ethics, we talked about that earlier, and ethics is a big thing definitely in IS. I'm assuming biology, there'd be a lot of ethics in there. Physics, there's a little bit. Chemistry, nah. Yeah, chemists and physicists don't care about ethics, they just care about the laws of nature. Biologists are the ones that have to go to ethical teams at universities and explain their actions. But ethics in this thing here is a big thing. It's something that's come up a lot. Develop a research question and ensure the validity of this study. So, we'll just go back here a second here. So you've got 122 patients. Some suffer from an isopropanol pad and taking Zofran, Zofran, it's an oral drug. Some are just taking isopropanol and the placebo, and some are just smelling saline. Look, I can tell you, I can probably tell the difference between a saline pad and an isopropanol one. I can already see a flaw in this question. But what are some ethical protocols? What? Even if you look here, consent, yeah. Do they mention anything there about consent? They don't, but the question actually doesn't need you to know that. But you guys have picked it up already. You must ensure that everyone consents to doing this. I would suggest as well, isopropanol is essentially just an alcohol. An ethical issue, you probably wouldn't be doing this on patients under 18. You wouldn't also, there's another, probably some ethnic groups. What are some ethnic groups that would have problems with the isopropanol? So people who can't drink alcohol. Yeah, so Islamic, I was going to say some of the fundamentalist Christian, basically your old school Abrahamic religions. Some of the Jewish people don't drink alcohol, do they? But if you're, is it a Hasid? What's the really fundamental? No, let's not get into a religious debate. But yeah, sorry.
If you were going to say ethnic groups, do you have to specify which one to get them off?
No, I would suggest you'd say ethnic groups whose background forbids them from intake of alcohol.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can't you just extend them to say anyone who doesn't consent or not?
You would have to consent and say that isopropanol is a form of an alcohol, and therefore under some situations. And I think that brings up a thing about informed consent as well. You have to be very, very clear, because most people say isopropanol, oh, that just sounds chemical, but it actually is an alcohol. I don't think people with that religious thing can get away and say, I'm going to drink methanol instead. One, it's basically still an alcohol, and two, it's going to send you blind. Sorry, back. Yeah. So the interesting thing here as well, they do give you placebo as well. Patients are not told whether they've got the placebo or not, which is, what is that an example of? Double-blind trials. Okay. So let's just focus here on the ethics. Okay, conducting the survey. What might be an ethical... Sorry, Sheree.
Would one of them also be the fact that they're not only consent, but also the fact that people, some are actually allergic to...
Yeah.
You know, like isopropanol or sniffing, or what's the concentrations, is it there?
Well, that might, yeah, that'd be another thing with you.
Like, do they get given the concentration or they don't?
I don't know, that's up for us. We're planning the investigation. But yeah, and so develop an research question. Can you think of what might be a valid research question for this? I know you've zoned out about halfway through stats when we were talking about this a little bit there. What might be a valid research question? Yeah?
Is a combination of isopropanol and Zofran like a better treatment for nausea than just one of them by themselves?
No, that sounds reasonable. Did everyone hear that? Does isopropanol and Zofran, is that better? Now, can you remember whether, is that a one or a two tail? I think it's two tail, isn't it? Yes, I got a nod from the front here. It is a two tail test. An appropriate conclusion. Now, this is the thing, the appropriate conclusion, we can actually use this data here. Severity of nausea symptoms. Looking at that data there, what do you think an appropriate conclusion is? And guys, actually these questions are in the back of your book as well if you want to have a look at them. They're back. We're skipping over a lot of stuff so that, because it's less important than this at the moment. Anyone want to have a conclusion? Yeah? No? Are you just waving? No one wants to have a go? Yep.
Just conclude that isopropanol is effective as a treatment because you can see with Zofran and with placebo, in both those cases, reducing the severity.
Yep.
Whereas the saline with the Zofran is doing pretty much nothing at all.
Awesome. So if you look here, isopropanol and Zofran, there is a huge thing here. Isopropanol and placebo, almost the same data. Saline and Zofran, There. Zofran doesn't do much. Isopropanol does. Oh, sorry. And ensure the validity. How are we going to ensure validity? First of all, what is validity? What's that? Don't answer what validity is by saying how valid it is. I know, I can see you. Yeah? The experiment achieves its aim. Okay, awesome. What is the aim? We go back here. Inhaling from an isopropanol pad may be good for nausea. Have we achieved our aim? Awesome. Now, if you look, and this is just from if you look on the NESA website, this is just part of their sample question package. So, ethical, justify. Now remember, what does justify mean? Provide reasons, okay? Ethical thing here, we can talk about Human Ethics Committee. Remember, biologists have to do all this ethical stuff. Ethical framework. Now, another thing, guys, sorry. The answer for this here, you do not have to write an answer like this. That is that big. I often, even when in the old days when we were looking at the HSC study books that have all the past papers, they will give you a 12-mark answer for a 6-mark question. They are just giving you as much information as possible. What you need to really do is look at these guidelines. Justifies a range of ethical protocols relevance. So, we got an S there. You have to give more than one. Now, you could give multiple ones and do a brief outline, give a bit of information about it, or you can pick 2 or 3 and go into a little bit of depth. So you can do the ethics committee to get your thing there. Informed consent, as we talked about before, and sorry, confidentiality as well. That's another thing of most medical trials, is that even though you're part of it, your name is not attached to it. You are just a number. You're just another brick in the wall for that there. And that way you don't have to be embarrassed by people saying, I read your study the other day and your name was mentioned as having this, this or this. Which has got their patients are hard to comprehend the study informed consent. That one there, I can see there. Reduce adverse risks to patients, privacy, independence. Look, this is kind of your meat and potatoes down here. The one thing is that part of implied consent as well is that the research very clearly tells you what you are going to get, what is going to happen, what's going to be required of you. Okay? Go into detail for that. And please ask questions if I'm going too fast. Research question is more effective than that there. Now, this is a thing here, a bit different for this one here. This is something you actually can almost directly quote the stimulus material and get yourself a mark, because it pretty much gives it to you there. And then you've got to do, as Shyam did with a couple of things before, you've got to refer back to what's going on there. The results show the greatest apparent reduction is when isopropanol was administered. Now, we go back to what you were saying before as well. I'd be referring to the graph and say, the first section of the graph shows that isopropanol, and that shows this. When you put these bits of data together, the Zofran was shown to have no significant reduction in nausea compared to the isopropanol. By saying that, you've got yourself up here, okay? And that's what you need to be doing. You can see here, these questions actually aren't in a huge amount of detail. And this is why I made that point at the start. Get to the point. Don't write everything you know about this. Is everyone all right with that? Okay, question 3, judgments. Assess the validity. We have to ask, and this is what we said before, does it address the research question? And that is probably the most important thing there. Is the research plan good enough to address the research question? So was that test there of giving people this and comparing it to Zofran, was that reasonable? You also, when they start talking about validity, reliability, that's when you bring in this idea of variables and controls. I think I wanted to go down there. I think Shyam touched on this before as well. They talk about the instruments. I'll do this I'll go into there. The instrument, we're told that the researchers used established protocols. There we go. and for measuring things there. So depending on what you got there, they might talk about the instrumentation. Was it accurate? Was it precise was the word I was looking for? You know, are they doing the right thing? And you can bring in a little bit probably of the ethics in there, but you've already answered that, so it's not that big a deal. Okay, so we got more. You can talk about data, sample, again, sample size as well, and the type of people there. Data, oh, we love that. So you could say, and you can also, in this question here, suggest improvements. So often trials go through multiple phases. They will do a small trial to make sure that whatever you're treating people with doesn't kill them. Okay, you only use it on a few people, that way the collateral damage, and then you widen it. And then you look at different, depending on what the drug's doing, you make sure, you know, a drug to treat prostate cancer you're not giving to female patients, because really it's not going to do anything. Reporting, you can talk about number of sites, okay, different sites presented. I think what they're talking about there is probably, you know, you don't just do it in one area. So you don't just go to, yesterday talked about hormone replacement therapy and the studies done into that. And a lot of that hormone replacement therapy was just on rich, middle class white people because they could actually afford the drugs. And so that's, you increase your sample size and things like that. Any more questions on that? I'm actually going to skip past this one because this is one of the ones which actually has the stimulus there. You've got a video to watch and you've got to respond to that. That might be better for you guys to watch back at school with your teachers and do that there. But probably will quickly talk here. We are talking, this is an 8-mark question. And so we've got, when you look at the market guidelines for stuff such as this, it is often, it's a very subtle thing for markers sometimes between that 5, 6 and 7, 8 range there. If you look there, using appropriate scientific language, mostly scientific language. So I think for most of you in here, it'd be very easy to get to the 5 and 6. To get to that 7, 8, which is going to be basically your E4 response, which means that you're in the top sort of 10 percentile, or 10% there. Now you put the word in there, comprehensive, appropriate. The information in the 2 sources. That word comprehensive appears in a lot of the higher end bands. And so that's a really thing there, comprehensive. And coherent's the other one that appears a lot in there. And so, as I said, we'll just skip past most of this one here. And apologies for going fast, but we do have not a huge amount of time, and some of you got some very long journeys. So I am mindful of time. But this one here I do want to talk about. This is one of the really interesting ones. This is your 15-mark essay question. And part of the reason I want to go through this is that this relates to one of the last points I made this morning, where you had to talk about a paradigm shift. Now, Fleming is an example of a paradigm shift in some way. Really changed microbiology and that there. But this is also a question which, if we go, no, sorry, I wanted to go down just here. This is a question that asks about your research project. So you should all know that when you do the exam, the Lockdown browser will give you a little toggle switch that you can look at your project, your scientific report, your 3,500 scientific report. Have I got that right? 3,500 words. You can look at it. Now, I've got to admit, when they first talked about this, I thought, oh, well, they're going to ask you direct questions on it. My gut feeling, and Sham can correct me on this here, is that, you know, your report is actually probably not, you're not going to be asked to quote directly from your report. Not necessarily. You may bring in bits of your report, but you're not going to be asked to write out the data and show your t-test or anything like that. It's basically there to help you. And so this one here is we've got here whole heap of information on Fleming, And to what extent do discoveries in science occur as a result of planned experiments? Now, of course, Fleming's experiment to find penicillin was not planned. It was a serendipitous thing there. And it's a lot of the things we talk about, particularly in IS, we talk about a lot of serendipitous stuff. You know, Percy Spencer invented the microwave from an accident. Okay? Science does not occur always from planned things, and that's what they want you to do here. And so in this one here, you can talk about your own experiment, and you've got to make a comparison. Is your experiment completely planned? I can tell you a few of my students, their final report is nothing like what they wanted to do at the start because they've discovered things along the way. Most of you, has anyone had a serendipitous moment and completely and utterly changed where they've gone? Or you're all, yeah? What was your...
I was originally doing mutations in the flies and then I changed to synesthesia.
So that's a very sort of different little... What sort of data did you have on synesthesia?
I'm doing the percentage of the brain during simulation.
Cool. Are you doing primary data or just secondary?
There's no research on it. So
Yeah.
I'm doing fMRI scans that I've found and getting done. So
That's really interesting, and that's cool. No, that's interesting, and look, that's Nessa's intention. Some of you guys are going to do some really cool, interesting things there. And you know, there's a lot of press about that. I'm not going to embarrass her, but one of the girls from Elderslie, I saw your stuff on dingoes was really cool. How's that going?
Yeah, it's really good, just to learn more about the research side of science and integrate something I really enjoy.
Yeah, cool. And that's really awesome that you can do something you've done before and you worked on there. I think I said earlier this morning, there's a girl from Wagga who's just been published. And, you know, that's going to happen. But don't feel embarrassed, well, I haven't done this groundbreaking research. That doesn't matter. Don't feel if your final project, you actually don't find much out. Because it's all about the scientific process. And you know, your final exam, your final mark is not going to be better because you've got a published paper or any stuff like that. It's just not the way it is. But you will be better prepared for a science career. So let's have a look here. 15 marks. It's going to be fun to mark this for the markers. So you can see here, comprehensive. I'll go there. I don't know why I'm wandering over there. You've got comprehensive understanding of scientific investigations and plans. Ideas and information in language, presents a logical and coherent arguments, integrating understanding from the stimulus and their research project. To get in that top band, you need to talk about the stimulus, you need to talk about your project and how those things can actually be linked. Now, for most of you, it's going to be, you talk about the fact that Fleming was doing an area, he was working on microbiology, but he found something that he wasn't looking for. You need to probably talk about in most of your projects that you have done research and you didn't find anything serendipitous or anything like that. You basically followed a linear path, although I know some of my students will say, I started here and then I went to here and then I went to here and I may have ended up over here. Let's just go to some of the things there. Now, this is I'm going to go back. This is a very long answer, but it is an essay. It's a mini essay. Now, let me do this calculation in my head. You've got 50 minutes. You know, you've got 50 marks. You have 120 minutes. You need about 2 marks per minute. You need half an hour to answer this question. Now, I'd probably suggest that you think, and this is probably where you might need some planning paper, and maybe spend 2 or 3 minutes outlining what you are going to write. Because you're going to be typing this answer up. And one of the things there, and I always tell this, it doesn't matter, and this isn't extension, this is IS, physics, whatever the hell I am teaching. For every mark, you probably need to make 1 point. Okay, now let's go back to the question. To what extent do discoveries in science occur as a result of planned experiments? So, what I would suggest there that you're writing, that you are talking about planned experiments. You can talk about your own experience there. So, talk about some planned experiments. You say that most of discovery is done via the scientific method or scientific process where you plan, you develop your inquiry question, you develop a hypothesis, you test, and then you either confirm nor deny your hypothesis. In your answer to stimulus, you say there, Fleming planned to do, what was he doing there? Okay, so he just went on holidays and left his lab a mess. And he came back and found this stuff here. Now, when you're talking about Fleming, you can actually talk about two different things. I would probably look at talking there and saying, Fleming had a serendipitous thing where he found this mold penicillin on his petri dishes. After that, he looked at blah, blah, blah. Fleming's first part is unplanned. However, from that unplanned thing, he then developed a rigorous scientific protocol and went forward. So in that case there, Fleming planned an experiment after an unplanned event. And that's basically how most science works. You then have to compare that with your SRP. And you have to basically say there, my report differs in Fleming's because I knew I did this here. I did background research, and you will go through all of this here. Also, another thing I also try and tell my students, if we go to the answer here, I would like my students not to write paragraphs like that. That is basically written in a Nessa style of way to do that there. I would suggest you probably even break your stuff up possibly into dot point things or small paragraphs. The idea is don't make it hard for a marker to read your response. In senior science, we've always sort of had a little bit of a rule, and it's in most things there. If a question asks for a clear and coherent response and you have to read it 3 to 4 times, it's not coherent, it's not clear. Yes, Sheree?
Can I just make a, because I was a past Simon, one of the things that we really don't like, and I did the online Year 10 one as well. I mean, we're lucky with the typing, all right, but don't forget all your other exams are scanned. Okay, this is some advice. Make sure you write clearly. Okay, so I have one kid in my year 11 class. I couldn't read his writing at all, and I'm talking at all. Okay, so that's very, very crucial if everything is being scanned. Like, there's no this business of actually someone sitting there trying to decipher what you're writing on. We're lucky in science extension, it's just a general thing about exams. Make sure you learn, you know how to write, because if they can't read it, they can't mark it.
And I know some of your parents think you're going to be future doctors and messy writing's part of that, but yeah, we're going to get there first. And so here, blah, oh, I've lost my laser again. If we look at the first one there, it does talk about happy accidents and serendipity and things like that there. And Fleming may have been remembered for his happy accident, but it was consolidated. So that's that point I made before. Fleming made an accidental discovery and then he planned after that. First instance was in the first induction, and then we'll say that there, that's almost repeating. And it goes through here. Had this not occurred, prevented the bacteria growth, blah, blah, blah. That is talking about there. So it's talking about the fact, as I've said a couple of times, an accident led to a regulated science experiment. In this one here, the first thing is there in my investigation involving whatever it was. So in this one here, rolling cylinders with rubber bands and masses hanging on them. Sounds like a STEM project more than an extension science thing, but that's all right. Ultimately, producer, contributor want to know about my project involved. Wait a minute, I actually don't like this answer. It doesn't exactly tell me what they did. I'm not going to give this 13 to 15 out of thing. I'm going to put it down to about 12 or something. But in this case here, they're talking about their project and how it was very organised. They also also with the project are talking a lot about milestones and things like that, and that's part of your planning process. That hopefully is reflected in your portfolio and that there. And so this really goes into a long thing talking about what they did. So it's giving some details about they did a planned investigation and here's how I planned it. Here's what I did. And that's essentially the sort of thing they really want there. And the next bit here is talking about reflecting back. So I think what you've got to do in a question like this, and I've got a feeling, and Sham can help me here, have they said that the 15-mark question will refer to their own project, or there's no guidelines for that? It generally will. So the 15-mark essay will ask you to reflect back on your own project. And so what you will have to do there is most likely, for you to do that, is you will be given some information about another thing in science. Now, because they're talking about paradigm shifts this year, and it's the first year of the exam, they're probably going to talk about Lavoisier, Einstein, McClintock, and Wegener. I wouldn't be surprised if a question for the 15-mark question is talking about paradigm shifts and comparing how the scientific method works in paradigm shifts using your own project as a comparison for scientific thinking and understanding. It's not a very good question, because I just made it up then. But it's the sort of thing they could ask you, okay? I've also here, in your booklet, I had to have this booklet ready about 4 weeks ago, and I've wanted to add some more sample questions in there. I just didn't get a time. But was thinking about a few sort of things there. So one thing they might ask you, describe how you use statistical analysis on one data set. You will be asked in one way or another, probably something like this, okay? How did you do it? Now, hopefully by the end of today's session, you go, well, I used a chi-squared test and a t-test and blah, 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 blah. And I'll tell you this much, this is where as well, you can go back and have a look at your project. You say, I used the chi-squared test and it showed me this. So that's the sort of thing you can go back and have a look at your project. Of course, they're describe. Describe means you talk about it, you give some points. Yes?
Does that mean you can use your project to do it?
Absolutely. There's no reason, because in this question here, it's actually referring to your data. Oh, okay. And your data, your summary of your data will be there available for you. And so what you could do then is say, well, I applied this statistical test, this is the numbers I got, therefore I know what I did was valid or whatever, yeah. There's no reason why you can't do that. So, of course, describe statistical analysis on one data set. Now, in saying that there, you could also bring that back there. If you've done some data analysis in class, you say, I know my class did some stuff on the Bureau of Meteorology data. You'd say, we looked at Bureau of Meteorology data and found that there was this correlation, there was that correlation. As long as you're bringing in something that's a valid bit of data, you don't just say, I went down the street and asked a few people things. This is another one here. I don't know whether they will ask stuff like this. Again, talking about CERN and that there, they could bring in ISS, they could bring in anything there. Most of what we've got here, timelines. So that's in your project. You've got to talk about timelines and benchmarks. So when they did the Large Hadron Collider, they said, here's our opening date, we've got to do this. So we've got to have all our super cool magnets in by this date, we're going to have this done there. And this can relate to your investigation as well by saying, I knew that beginning of term 3 was going to be my report due in, therefore I had to have my stats done by this time, I had to get my data by this time, I had to gather this and do that by this time. Now, that's the sort of thing, and 7 marks there, I'm just making that up. I haven't had time to do guidelines or anything like that, and I thought there was more here. But are there any questions? Because pretty much that's pretty much it. But what questions do you need? What questions do you have? Yes?
With writing your responses, you know how in the report you can't use words like my, I, sort of first person.
Yes.
Is that all right, writing your responses to each other?
If it's a question, okay, because what you got here, and that's a really good question. It's the difference between a scientific report and answering questions. In a scientific report, yes, it has to be passive voice, past tense, third person. This was done there. Writing your response, and I think Sham can help me here if I'm wrong. If you said, we did this, or I did this, I think that's right for the HSC response. Because it's not a report, it's an exam. Now, you do have to bring aspects of your own report into that, but I don't think any of that stuff there is not as big a deal as it is in writing your report. Your report is a very specific document addressing a few things. Sorry, was there another question up the back? No? Any other questions? Come on, ask, or we are done.
I'll give you a different one today.
Oh.
Guys, it's just a small gift from us to both Bill and Shane. Bill was here yesterday, so you got a different one, but thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you. Toblerone today.
Thank you.
And also our LMC pen as well. So thank you so much, Jeff. Can I get you guys to thank these guys, please?
Now, sorry, another thing there, if you do have further questions, get your teachers to email us. Like we've gone through a lot of stuff very quickly today. You guys, considering the hour and a half to 2 hours of stats you had, you're actually coping really well.